Well, hello everybody. I've just been reading some of the comments in the chat before we started. So, hello from Oakland, Sweden, Styria in Austria, the Netherlands, Gothenburg, Atlanta, Georgia, New York. Yeah, we've got a lot of people in all sorts of places at the moment. Let me know if you can't hear me. Hopefully, we're sorted audio-wise and everything else, and you should be able to see my screen. And as far as as with all these sessions, there's a little cog in the bottom right-hand corner in your video window, so make sure that's set quality-wise as high as possible. So I'll just let's check. Wave or say hello. Make sure you can all hear me. There'll be a delay on the comments, so while we're waiting for that, today's session we're going to be looking at all sorts of things to do with frames and flows and moving things around and layout type things, because the comments that I got when I asked about what you'd like to see in this session and some of the problems or situations people have got into on the Facebook pages were generally around kind of layout type things. So I thought it was worth in this session covering some of these. So if you're thinking, oh, hang on a minute, that isn't the kind of thing I want to know about, I'd like to know about something else, then ping me an email on discoverdorico@steinberg.de, and maybe we can look at some other options in the future. So for this session, I should say thank you to Benjamin and Mark Larcher on the Facebook page, to Ed for sending me some files, to David McDonald for sending me some graphics, and also Dave in Nashville, who I've just noticed is also watching, for when we were talking about some worksheet options and how we go about things. All of you have effectively contributed to today and what we're doing. I'm not going to necessarily use your files, but in some cases I have actually, but in some cases I've kind of mocked up simpler examples of things so that we can see the kind of situations, and then hopefully if there's any other questions after that, we can carry on the conversation after that as well. So the first one, and with a lot of these examples, I'll do them from the beginning. So if you want to follow along, use the pause button if I'm going a bit quick, or rewatch this video later and follow along with any of the things, then you can do with a lot of these examples. So the first one was about text frames and graphics frames. Actually, the question was about text frames, moving things and importing flows and kind of putting projects together with a number of different songs, ideas, flows, basically. So I'm going to start with this new project. I'm going to use violin today. And we'll have, so we've got one flow with one violin in it for the first example. So for this one, let's just, so we can identify it, let's make this one C. So we'll do that. We'll identify and call it C. You can see the shortcuts I'm pressing at the bottom, so I won't necessarily tell you all the shortcuts I'm using. You'll see those appear at the bottom of my screen. So you can press this plus button, or you can just press Shift F to get a new flow. Let's call that one D. I guess you know what's coming at this point. So in this flow here, double click. We'll put this one into D, and we'll have some notes in that one, just so we can identify the difference between these two flows, C and D, with a violin. Now let's say also maybe we'd added some other elements to this. So in engrave mode, I'm going to turn on the frames toggle, and we'll add into here. Well, in fact, let's put in a graphic so we can see changes. So we're going to kind of add things that you won't have added these exact examples, but we'll add some options here. So here's a graphic of Dorico logo, and let's put in a text frame here, and we'll say made in Dorico. And that's simply so that we can identify, and we've got something to play with here as to when we want to move things around. So the idea and the original example was a lot of actually one-page examples. Actually, the file that I was sent, that Benjamin sent, was I think 130 odd flows and pages with lots of information in, and various text items and moving things around, and how you handle all of those kind of things. So one of the questions that came up was, what happens when I've imported another file into here and I want to move some of these flows around, and what happens? So to do this and to do it all from the beginning, I'm just going to create another project. So Control N for a new project, and we'll add another violin. I don't know if you can hear it, but the ice cream van has just gone past. Yes, it's only March, but he's trying already. So in here, I'm going to say, let's say this one is A, and so we can identify this one. And something else that was pointed out to me by Mark Larcher, actually, was what happens when you've got other text items on other pages as well. So in this example, I'm going to go to engrave mode. I'm going to press this button over here on the panel on the right hand side to add a new page. We'll stick that after page 1. I won't use a master page, so it's just going to give me a blank page. So here, after flow 1 is a blank page. And I'll add a frame into here. And just so we can identify it, we'll stick a text box in and say text for flow A. Still called flow 1. Okay, flow A. There we go. So now you can see we've got flow A and we've got the text for flow A. I'll save this. So it'll be saved in the file for today, and we'll call this, I'll have to call it flow A2 because I've already done this. But here we have this project, and we also already had this project that we'd started. So flow A is in one project, and flow C and D are in another project. Let's save this one. So this is C and D. There we go. So if I wanted to amalgamate these and get flow A into here, you may already be aware you can do file import flows. Now, I suppose the important thing to mention here is that we are importing flows. This is the one I just made, flow A2. So we are not going to get that extra text item that was added at the end of flow A. That's not included in the flow. It's a separate text item. So I'm going to import flow A, so it will just be flow A, and you can create all new players or merge with existing players. Now, in my case here, because I've already got a violin, and I also had a violin in the file that's been imported, this A flow, then actually I want to merge with existing players. If I left it with the default option, I'd end up with violin 1 and violin 2, and you may want that, but in this case, I don't. So I'll merge with existing players where possible. So instead of creating a new violin, it's just going to merge the violin it imports with the one that's already there. Here we go. So now I've got C, D, and A. If I now wanted to put these in alphabetical order, I can go to setup mode, and I can drag this one to before flow C. Now what's happened is that I have flow A here before C and D, but the text and the graphic are still here. So what's happening at this point is, and you know, the reason why this happens is that these two items, so the graphics frame and the text frame, they are placed onto page 1. The fact that the music has moved to another page, these are still stuck to page 1. So if this actually was a text frame that you wanted to be effectively on page 2, then you need to move them, and there's a couple of things you can do. One thing, maybe you want to copy them, is you could select this frame here. So I just selected the outline of it, and if I also Command or Control select the other frame, then you have some options up here. When you select these pages and right click, you can do things like swap with next page, move pages, and copy selected frames to selected pages. So if I select page 2, this one, so I've selected page 2 in my panel on the right hand side, and I right click, I can then copy the selected frames, which are these two here, to the selected pages, which I've selected here. So I'll do that, and so it will copy the frames I'd selected to the page I'd selected here. Hopefully that makes sense. If I undo that, there's also some other things you could do. So you could say, actually, I want to swap with next page. So if I do swap with next page, then those items move and they swap with the next page. And if there is a previous page, then there's also a swap with previous page option. There's also, if you want to move more than one page on in the score, maybe you want to move a few pages, there's a move pages option, and you can also use that one too to move various things around. So if you've got to the point where you have imported some music or you've been dragging these dragging flows around and items that you'd put in, and you can see the little red triangle up here, which shows you that these are overrides. They're not in these templates down here. Then these overrides, these frames we've created here, if you want to move them, then you can use one of those options up here in the pages information and the pages panel. Excuse me a second. Bit of cough. So are there any? Let's just wait for a second and see if there's any questions in the comments on that front. I think that some of the confusion was where either a file was being imported into another file and you don't get the text information, and you might wonder why, and that's because that page we'd added that said text from flow A, that's not actually attached to the flow, so it doesn't import when you do import flow. Or it may be that you had while you've been laying out the pages, you'd added some items like this, and then they were appearing on the wrong page, and you need to move them. And that's some of the options and how you can move some of that information. There doesn't seem to be any comments on that kind of thing at the moment, so we'll carry on for a bit. Another option, another comment and question I had was from Ed, who wanted to know about adding title pages to some parts, not necessarily all parts, and it was to do with whether they were left or right pages. So what I thought I'd show is kind of creating a title page effectively that you could then put into whichever parts you decide you want to put them into. So what I'm going to do with this one is start with the project that I was sent, which is this one. So we'll load the file. There's a question in the comments about composers who need large time signatures and measure numbers. Right now, there isn't a solution for that really in Dorico, but it is something that we're working on at the moment. I can't tell you any more information today, but yes, we are aware and looking at things. So Louis, yes, but not yet. So here's a piece I was sent. It's got a score and some parts in it, and one of the parts, as you can see here, has some title page information before the music starts. Now this happens to be one that scrolls up and down. You can change those options down here. So if you want to do a left and right scroll or an up and down scroll, then you can change them down there. So I was checking the comments again for a second. The flow A text in the previous example we just did, you can't really import it. You'd be better off copying and pasting that flow A text, unfortunately, unless in some cases, if it exists in the project info, then you'd be best put it back in there and using tokens. We'll use some tokens when we do this file in a minute. But in some cases, if you've already got a lot of text like that in another file, then actually maybe I would have been better off importing the C and D flows into file A. It depends on each case. But yes, at the moment, we don't have a particular a way of saying actually this page here I want to import it into another file unless it's part of a flow. So hopefully that helps. But if not, and you've got specific examples, again, at any point in the month, if you want to say, here's another example that would be useful to show in these sessions, just email it to discoverdorico@steinberg.de. And with copy paste, yes, you might lose some of the formatting. And like I said, I suppose we don't have a way of doing all of those options yet. Hopefully you wouldn't have got too far in one file without either importing a flow is going to help one way or the other, maybe importing the file into there. The importing flows is also useful if you have changed lots of, for example, engraving options or text style options, and you you've got effectively the template set up as you want it, and you then want to apply that to other files. Instead of trying to apply that to other files, import the other file into the one you're working on. So I was working on a file for a guy recently. He's doing music for the Baltic Soul Orchestra, and when he's done one of the files with the size of the fonts and everything else he wants, he can then just use file import flow and import another project into that file, because then you'll get all of the options also applied to. So hopefully that makes sense. If not, maybe we should look at that in another session. So with this particular example, lefty and righty, what we're doing is we've got a template that well, at the moment we don't have a template. We've got a part where we want to put templates in. So the horn and F happens to have this title page, but the trumpet part, for example, if I just zoom out a bit, doesn't have one. And trumpet 1 also doesn't have one. And maybe we want to and we don't want to have to create this. So if I go to engrave mode, you can see these are overrides. There's a little red triangle. So these frames have been done as overrides. And actually what we'd like to do is apply the same thing to lots of parts and have consistent layout. So what I would do is, on the right-hand side in the master pages, you've got a first and a default. And as we talked about before, first is the first page of any flow, and default is any subsequent page. So you can see here 3, 4, 5, they're all using default. And this page here with the title on it is using first. So what I'm going to do is press this plus button at the bottom down here. And this is going to create a new master page, and I will call this part title. Titles, doesn't matter. It doesn't need to be based on anything. We're not basing it on any of the other templates, and it will be a custom type. So I'll just press OK. So down here now, I have a part title double page here, which is a new master page. So I will double click on that to edit it. And now in here, I can add the information I want. So in this particular example, because it was a fairly simple one that was mocked up for this case, I'm going to put it into here. Now I could put you don't want to put the part name specifically, you want to use tokens. So if you say layout name in our tokens here, then that will pull in the right layout name when you apply it to the part. I'm going to do all this in one frame just to make it a bit easier, well, a bit quicker anyway. So I'm going to I could put the title in, but in case I'm going to use it in more than one case, I'm going to say flow 1 title. I'm going to make that bit maybe centered, and let's say it's going to be quite big. And then I'm going to say, what else should we? Oh, yes, we also want the composer. So we'll say the flow 1 composer. Oh, that's all a bit big. So let's make all of that size, you pick, 2824. Maybe you want to put that down a bit. So you can lay these out however you want to put them in here. And then at the bottom, I'm going to put a graphic in. So here's a graphic frame. There we go. Double click here and put in the graphic, which is the logo that we want to use. You can resize this to make it the size that you want the logo to appear so that you can get that correct. And then press the left to right copy button up here. So it will copy the information. So no matter if the part starts at the moment on a left or a right page, I mean, I suppose you could decide one or do them differently either way, especially if you've got page numbers involved. But normally the title page wouldn't. So here, we've got the layout name. Maybe you want the layout name to move if it's a left or a right. You can decide those kind of options. I'll make mine the same, and I'll close this master page editor. So now what I'm going to do, now this part that's already got this page in here, I'm going to select it up here in the right-hand panel, right-click, insert a master page change. And the master page change is that I would like to use my new part title instead. And I'm only going to do it for the current page only. Now, it looks like that hasn't done anything, because it hasn't done anything, because you had overrides in here as well. So I'm going to remove all page overrides. And so now it's gone back to horn and F, lefty and righty John Doe. And this is you can see there's no overrides up here anymore. This is using my part title. So here, when I select this one, you can see it's selecting first. When I select this page, it's selecting default to show you that one it's using. When I select page 1, it's selecting, if we move this down, it's selecting part title to show you it's using that one. Now for a part, for example, the trumpet parts, they didn't have a title. If you wanted to now apply the same title page, you can go over here, insert pages. So I press this button. I can insert one page before page 1 and use the master page of part title and press OK. So now I've got Trumpet 1 in C, Lefty and Righty by John Doe, Art and Sound Music logo, and then the part carries on. So for any of the parts that you choose now that you wanted to apply that to in this project, you could easily do that, and you'd get all the information that you wanted in there. So hopefully that covers a bit of the kind of master pages and template type options, and that, if that's going to be useful. I'm just going to check the comments briefly for a second. I'm not quite sure the question is about different part types. The parts are, so in setup mode, you have various layouts. You have a layout for the full score, and then you have a layout for the parts, which is one or more of the instruments. So I think that's basically what you mean on that point. Hopefully. If not, maybe, as I said before, send me an email, discoverdorico@steinberg.de. Maybe I can clarify those. There's also a question about the sets. What's the usefulness of sets? You can create your own sets. The default ones is that there's a set for parts and there's a set for the score, and you can choose. So you'll notice here, this is the full score set, and this is the part set, and you can flick between them. So when I'm looking at the full score here in engrave mode, this is showing me the default full score option, groups, sets, if you like. And when I'm looking at a part up here, then it's showing me the default part ones. But you can set your own in there as well if you want to create your own sets. Can you change staff types for an instrument like treble staff only for a piano? Well, you can change the clefs that are being used. So you could have a piano with 2 trebles or 2 basses. You can hide ones that it isn't using. But if you wanted a treble staff only for a piano, it might be easier to just create another instrument that's, for example, like a flute, that is just a treble staff instrument, and then relabel it piano, maybe. In fact, we'll sort of touch on a bit of that when we look at another example in a minute. But first, I wanted to look at another layout option for title pages. This came up on the music engraving tips page about creating title pages and graphical layouts and those kind of things. We kind of looked at a simple case here with parts, but there was another particular example that I thought it was worth having a quick look at. So this piece, and I'll just do a kind of mock-up of this one again. So I'm going to start a new piece, and this piece happened to be for 2 alto saxophones, and it was one of David McDonald's pieces that they were talking about, and he had some very beautifully laid out title pages and information pages, and it's a piece for 2 saxophones. So here's 2 saxophones. So if we were to do this kind of thing in Dorico, here's one way you might do it. And if you go to engrave mode, similar option again, I'm going to press this insert pages. I'm going to insert, in this case, I'm just going to do 2 pages before page 1. Not going to use a master page, just want 2 blank pages before page 1. Here we go. So now I've got, here's page 1 and here's 2 blank pages. The first page was, I suppose, similar to the one we've just done. So if we do a quick version of that, it had some text information at the top. The example I'm actually creating at this point here is a PDF, a JPEG actually of it, is this linear geometry. So there's some big text and a big graphic at the bottom. And then I'm going to do this page here as well, which has an image behind it and some text over the top. So it was how you might create these kind of pages. So what I'm going to do in here is put the text in. So in this particular one, I'm double-clicking this box, and it's called linear geometry. We'll do this in a relatively quick way. It said 2015. It said for 2 alto saxophones by David McDonald. And then, yes, of course, you might want to set some sizes and various things in here. So let's say that was 48, and maybe that one is, oops, is a bit smaller. Let's go with 36 and call both of these 24, something like that. I think he was also using a different font, and I can't remember which one he was using. So let's use American Typewriter. So if you want to change the fonts or anything else, then that's relatively easy to do. I can see now that definitely wasn't the font he was using, but never mind. So now if I choose here the insert graphics frame, then I can draw out a big graphics frame, double click in there, and add the graphic that I want for the bottom. There we go. So there is the graphic at the bottom. Now, I did notice on the example he did that the graphic was full width. And of course, by default, Dorico's got margins on all of the pages. If you do want to print full width, and of course, I suppose it depends on your printer and what the actual output for this is, for example, then you might want to change this. Just before that, there's a question about, can I set the first page to the left page? Yes, you could call it page 2, change the page number. However, it sometimes depends what you're printing it to. So, for example, here, my full score, if we look at this in print view, here's page 1. Here's page 1 and page 2 and page 3. Sometimes it depends how you're doing this. If you're printing this as spreads, then this it sits on the right hand side, if you like, and the music starts here because of the blank page in the middle. However, if you just choose 2 up, then this will appear on the left with the blank page and the music starts over here. So in some cases, you might not need to change the page numbers. You might just need to choose the layout and how it's going to print, whether it's a booklet you're doing or a 2 up or a spreads or anything else. So I'm not quite sure what the exact question is, but there you go. And the next question about, is there a way of creating osseous staves or stopping the stuff halfway through a system? Not today, but leave it with me because you can't say anymore. So what I was talking about in this one, sorry, sidetracked by comments, was that the frames that we have here, we've got margins, and if we wanted to get rid of the margins. Now, at the moment, you can only get rid of all of the margins, not just kind of on one page. Unless Daniel or somebody steps in and tells me different. So what I'm going to do is in our page margin, so this is layout options, and I did get there using a shortcut, Command Shift L or Control Shift L. You can also get it here from setup mode if you want to, so setup and layout options, or you can use the cog down here for the layout options. So I did it with this shortcut. In page setup category, for the layout I'm talking about, in the page margins, I'm going to get rid of the bottom, the left, and the right margins by setting them all to 0. I'm going to press apply and press close. So the advantage is that now this graphic fits right at the bottom. And if I wanted to, I could move that down a bit further if we wanted it to sit right at the bottom of the page, maybe. I suppose you might. Let's just move this bit down a bit, and you could get it to sit the size and everything else to sit exactly where you wanted it to. I'm moving the wrong frame now. Well done, me. Actually, this graphic frame, this text frame probably needs to move in a bit. And if you get towards the edges of these pages and they're difficult to click on, don't forget, of course, if you've got something selected, you can press Tab, and then you can move around to the items on the page. So then you can use shortcuts if you want to move those in. So if that's easier than selecting it with a mouse and moving it, then there are shortcuts to do that too. So now on this page here, we've got the effectively the margin here, but the graphic fits the bottom. It does mean that over here, you're going to have the same problem with the music. So you probably need to edit your master pages as well. So if you double click on the master page, select maybe the music frame or all the frames, and again, you probably want to bring these in a bit. There we go, and then say copy left to right, so that your music would also sit. I guess you'd also probably do it for these text boxes at the top. Depends what you want. Depends what you want to do. So on page 2, what we had was more information for the score. There's a big graphic underneath it. So we'll select a graphics frame, and we'll drag this one out. Oops, missed. helps if I click on the page, doesn't it? There we go. So here is a big graphics frame. So we'll double click into that and we'll add the background image to that one. There we go. And then over the top of that one, we'll put in a text frame. Now we can't do a sort of send to front, bring to back kind of option at the moment, maybe one day. Also, hopefully one day we'll have some alignment options. And to make this one a little bit quicker, I'm going to cheat slightly in that I have some text page. So I'm going to select, copy and paste from my text editor. There we go. So we have some text, and then maybe just adjust the sizes of these. So I think this was a bit bigger. So let's say that was 36. Maybe that's a bit big actually. Let's say it was 24. Maybe this one is, let's say 18. And then I think some of these were bold. So we'll change some of these and the program note. And you could do lots of these as individual text boxes if you want to, but I think in this case it works well doing it all in one text box. You do have justification options as well. So in here, if you want to justify any text, so you could, if you want to select everything and justify things, or just certain paragraphs, or left or right or centered, you've got those options as well. So now what we have here now is the title page here and an information page here with the graphic in the background, and then the music can carry on. So hopefully that gives you an idea of the kind of things. It's to save you going out or doing some of these pages in another program. Yes, sometimes there are advantages to doing it maybe in another program, but in many cases it would be quite nice to be able to do these just and keep it all in the same program. So hopefully now you can keep it all in Dorico. There's a question about selecting frames. If you've got one frame selected, you can use the arrow keys to move between frames. So for example, when I'm pressing left, right on this one, I can move between various frames that are selected here. Tab was what I was using to select the items of that frame. If I want to adjust a bit of that frame, and I press tab again, then I can now move that whole frame, or I can just press left and right to select other frames in there. So that might be useful, because sometimes, yes, if you've got overlapping frames, it can be difficult to select a frame or select the right handle on the frame. So I'd use tab and select the handles, or just use left or right to select various different frames that are on there. So hopefully that will help. So there's one more example I wanted to show you. Sorry if I'm keeping you a bit long. Let's just save this one. This is a linear one that'll do. So the last one I wanted to show you was about a worksheet option, and this came up because I was sent a file by Dave, which looks like, he says stalling while he finds it, looks like this one. And initially, the text doesn't matter too much. The point was there are lots of musical examples on this page, and there's a treble clef and a bass clef. And initially, while we were talking about doing this, I said, well, if you've got one big music frame and you just make it shorter, all of these will line up. You could put one long stream of music into here and change the clef part way. Sounds simple. And I suppose that's the way you would probably do it in other notation programs. He says, trying not to name any names. However, while we were then doing it, Dave and I were then talking and saying, well, what happens if you then want to put an alto clef in part way? If you want to do 2 treble clef and then an alto clef and bass clef and then back to alto or back to treble or anything else, and there's a lot of clef change type information, then you start to have to use hide or opacity changes to it just gets a bit messy. And I then thought, well, actually we should probably think about worksheets. When you're writing about worksheets, try and think of them, I mean, this is modal, but try and think of them as modular in a way. If I was to use this layout for something else, if I'm doing this and I want to decide that this one now needs to be a musical example or a different question, actually, or if this was in a different key, if there was a key signature for this question or anything else, then actually doing them as individual frames would be a better option. And as soon as anybody starts doing worksheets and looking at individual frames, you can end up with, oh, but hang on, I've got a lot of extra music being created and a lot of extra pages and that kind of thing. So I thought, right, let's do one of these examples, because it will help for a number of layout things, and there's some other tricks I thought might be useful. So what we'll start with is a new project, of course. And in our new project, What should we have? We'll just have a flute this time. A treble clef instrument for now. So here is my flute. And let's say this, there was an example which had a scale in it. So let's say we are going to actually have in here, a C Dorian scale. Maybe we need an example with a C Dorian scale. So let's call this one C Dorian. Maybe you want some other examples. So maybe you also want, I don't know, we create a new flow and say we also want F Dorian or something like that. I've just typed too many capitals. There we go. So maybe you'd make another one which and you'd say you'd have another scale in it. Maybe we'd also decide we want to put a key signature in. Who knows? Anyway, so what I would probably do when I'm thinking about worksheets is create in a separate flow, can be on a separate page because that's the default, all of the things that you might want to use in this worksheet. And then later on, when you want to add new things to the worksheet, you can come back here and just add all of the new items. So let's say we also want just a treble that's blank, and maybe we want a bass clef example that's blank, and maybe we also want an alto clef example that's blank. So we'll just go on, I'll have an alto blank. You could change the clef in some of these if you wanted to. You could also, maybe you're using particular instruments. So you could say, actually, I also want to add a cello. So I've got a bass clef example, which also, of course, has the right sounds on it. And maybe we also want a viola, for example. So, so then in your examples, you can decide exactly what you want. So if your C Dorian doesn't involve cello and viola, take them out. If you're, similarly with the F one, maybe that doesn't include anything. Maybe the bass and the alto one, if I've shift selected these two, maybe they don't want a flute. Bass isn't going to want that one. Alto isn't going to want that one. You can decide what's going to appear in all of these. What was the one I missed? Oh, that one. I should have done these in a slightly quicker way, but never mind. So you can decide for each of the examples you want to create which instrument is going to be in them. So these are flute, this one's cello, this one's viola. Which clefs, which keys, and you create all of these bits of examples. Now, when you're in write mode, of course, I'm effectively using the full score for this, if that makes sense. So what I would probably then do to kind of stop confusion of things and losing things and things being created in the wrong places is it's probably worth going back to setup mode and using this button, which is to create a custom score layout. So I'm going to add a custom score layout. And in my custom score layout, now by default, there's nothing in it. You can see there's no ticks here for flows and there's no ticks for players. So I'm going to say that the custom score is allowed everything. In fact, I'll show you what happens as I'm doing this. So if I switch to, yes, I can't till there's something in it. So if I'm going to add everything, so I'll add all of the players and I'll add all of the flows. So you just tick the boxes to say, theoretically, everything is allowed in my custom score. So now, it doesn't matter which mode you're in, now you can go to custom score. Now, to make this easy for myself, I'm going to call this worksheet. So I have my worksheet layout and I have my score layout and I can do different things with them. So here is my worksheet, which doesn't look anything like the worksheet I want yet. What I would probably do, and there are multiple different ways to do worksheets. So you might say, well, actually, I want to do something some other way. But this is kind of making a slightly more modular worksheet. When you want to make changes in the future, it's not just about making one layout and saying that's done. It's about making something that you can switch questions in and out later on. So how about with your master pages, make a new blank master page based on nothing, custom. So here it is. Here's my blank master page. I'm not going to add anything to it. So page 1 over here, I'd like to say insert a master page change. And I'd say use the blank master page from this page onwards. Go. So now there's nothing in it. So I'm not getting extra music randomly appearing at any point. Because if you start doing worksheets, or the way a lot of people do it is they go to the full score, and on page 1 they'd start editing this bit, and then they put something else in underneath and something else underneath. That's all fine, but you still at this page and this page and this page and this page. So how about We create this a worksheet, a custom layout called worksheet. It's blank. We've applied our blank master page to it. It's blank. It's a clean sheet of paper we can start adding to. But we now effectively have a library of things that we can put into it. So turn on your frames toggle, grab a little music frame. Here's a music frame. And yes, by default, it's going to put something in here. So you can now choose what it's going to put in here. So you can say, actually, I would like a C Dorian scale in there. Then you can choose a new example here. And you could say, in this one, I would like an F Dorian. And then maybe you say, I'd like another one, and maybe I want some examples with a bass clef. There you go. So we've got a bass clef example in there. Now, if this is a proper worksheet, I suppose you want to turn some of these labels and things off. So in your layout options for players, for the worksheet layout that you've now got selected, and it'll select that by default because you're working on it, you could do things like, first let's do the staves and systems and turn off the names. So I don't want to see staff labels on any of the staves. So press apply and you'll see now the labels have disappeared here. On examples like this one here, where I've got a little short bar, what you'll want to do there is in layout options, you'll want to go to note spacing and turn off this justification option. So it doesn't bother justifying things. So press apply and you see that's happened in the background over there. See? So I can close those now. I suppose there is potentially a little cheat. What I'd probably do is double click in here, enter something. I mean, the above examples are sort of 8.4. If you put in any meter so that you effectively have bar lines, effectively, there is a bar, it's not just an open-ended thing. Yes, I don't want to see that. So down here, I'm going to hide the time signature. What I would probably then do is in layout options, where for all of the players, I would probably just untick show bar rests in empty bars. So if I do that, it means that any single bar rests now in this layout won't appear. So now if I was to carry on with various things, so in engrave mode, I say now I want what haven't we used yet? We use an alto one, so we can have an alto blank one. The first time I use the alto one, I suppose I could do similar, put it into any meter. It doesn't matter really which meter. Turn off the metronome marking for this particular example. Another thing you might want to do is you don't want final bar lines maybe at the end. You can change those if you want to. So in notation options, you can just go into bar lines and say, actually, just use a normal bar line. However, this is flow specific. So if this applies to all of your flows, select all of them first. So select all of the flows here, and there's a select all button at the bottom if you want to use that. Change them all to normal bar line and press apply. I mean, it might not, in whatever your particular case is. So now you can say, I'm starting to build up, a similar worksheet, but in a more useful way, because now if you decide later on that you want to change this flow to be the blank treble or the alto clef, for example, you can just switch them over. Switch these two examples over, for example, and you've got a lot more flexibility later. So yes, it may seem initially like, well, why am I setting all these things up initially? But actually, it probably makes a lot of sense in the end when you decide you want to move things around, and there's a lot less kind of messing around with hiding and showing clefs or key signatures and that kind of thing. And of course, you also have the advantage now in that these can be any size. So yes, I've kind of lined them all up by eye, but if you want to make these any size or any position on the page, then they can be. So it's a much more useful option then. And then later on, when you decide, actually, I need a new flow, I need a new Dorian scale, for example, you can just go back to setup mode. You can make a new flow, call it whatever you like. You can use the whatever you like flow as long as you put it into your worksheet. So I'll tick the box and I select the worksheet, tick the box. Now I can use that on my worksheet if I want to. So you can do lots of those if you want to. So hopefully the idea was to say, when you're thinking about worksheets, I think because of the way we used to do a lot of worksheets, and this was the original example. You start to think about one long piece of music, and maybe was it 9 or 10 bars, separated onto separate lines with system breaks, and and how those kind of things work. But actually, maybe that's not the best way of doing worksheets all the time, because when you want to change things later on, or reuse this and change the examples and change clefs and key signatures later on, this is hopefully a better way of doing it. So I kind of rattled on a bit today. Sorry about that. I'm just going to check any of the comments. How would you insert a flow that's multiple pages on a master page? Yes, the flows I inserted were only one page, but that doesn't matter. If you insert a flow that's multiple pages, it will just insert a flow that's multiple pages. By default, when you do file insert flow, import flow, it will put it as the last flow in the project, but you can drag these around. So if you then want to drag like this, you just pick them up and drag them. And then you can resort the order that way. So if you've written piece 1 and 3, and then you've written somebody else written piece 2, you can then put it in the right place by dragging it around. And the fact that it's multiple pages doesn't matter. So when you because each flow by default will have and this is of course now a bad example, so I'll go back to my full score. The first page of any flow will use the first master page, and then subsequent ones would use the default master pages. And copying frames from one page to another at some point, you can copy frames. That was kind of what we showed a little bit earlier. So if you got, I suppose, layout wise, you can't. If that's a bit tricky. You can copy individual frames. So if I insert a graphic, for example, on this page here, what did we use earlier? The Dorico logo. Here's a graphic. If you want to put that on another page, you can select that graphic, select a page over here, and then you can copy the selected frames to selected pages, and it will copy the same location. So that might help you in some cases. And of course, there's the copy options in the master pages, but maybe I'm reading into it, and that I know what you mean. If you've kind of done the layout in one part and you want to kind of copy you can't copy a custom layout to another part. Maybe that's what you want to do, but you can duplicate the part and then apply the right instrument to it. So Robert Knox, if I'm not explaining exactly what you want, email me. Easiest one is discover Dorico, all one word, at steinberg.de. So discover Dorico at steinberg.de. If I've not actually got to do your exact example, Command C. Command C won't work for this one. You can't Command C and copy it over here. You have to tell it where it's going. So maybe that example is okay, but if not, like I said, email me and we'll go over that. If there's anything else after this session, any of the bits where you rewatch them and you think that doesn't make sense, or there's a project you're doing and there's a problem with it that you've got stuck and you think it might make a useful example, if you want to email me the project file, that's always useful, and I can have a look at that. And maybe potentially even use it or use an example of that in a future session. But in the meantime, answer your question, of course, as to how you want to achieve something. So I think unless there's any other major comments in the chat, we'll basically draw to a close for today. So from now on, I suppose if you happen to be a student at the University of the Arts in the Netherlands, maybe I'll see you next week. On Monday or Tuesday. There's also a session next Wednesday, the 20. He says, checking quickly, the 20. Yes, next Wednesday. There's a session at YML, so Yamaha Music London, for Basker. So if you want to come along to that event, I don't think it's Basker members only. So if you want to come along, let's see Wednesday. It's the 28th, sorry, Wednesday the 28th of March. So if you're in London, please come along to Yamaha Music London, which is in Wardour Street. And that session, I believe, is at 5 o'clock. And other than that, there's various other sessions happening. There's one happening in Italy. And if you check probably the Facebook pages is a good place to go, because then all the events will be listed, either the Steinberg one or the Dorico ones. And if I don't see you before, then I'll also be at the Music Messe in Frankfurt in April. And after that, the week after that, will probably be our next Discover session. So the next one I'm planning is for Wednesday, the 18th of April. Check Facebook for details in case anything else changes. But yes, if you've got a question, an example, something that you think, I'm trying to do this in Dorico, how would I do it? And especially if, of course, it would make another useful session. But if you've got a problem with it, then send it to me at discoverdorico@steinberg.de. Maybe we can use it in a future session. The other thing I wanted to just mention is that if you have any playback problems, there's a new video done by Anthony. So if you're looking on our YouTube channel, so it's youtube.com/Dorico, there's a new video about troubleshooting playback issues in Dorico. So you'll see there's this new video by Anthony, and it's all sorts of things. And if you do the show more here, there's a link to all sorts of things here, so you can just jump to a particular bit of the video. But we thought it was just worth, in case you've had a problem, with something, for example, when you're on a Windows machine and you can't hear a YouTube video at the same time as running Dorico, how do you resolve that? There's a little video that shows you exactly what you'd need to do. So that video, it's just go to youtube.com/Dorico and have a look in case that video is useful. Of course, all of these sessions that I do are also saved on there, so you can look at any of those sessions at any point, and there's quite a number of those. And of course, all the much more useful videos Anthony's done on individual bits of Dorico and individual modes, and they're very short, quick, useful 2 or 3 minute videos. So if you have a problem with something, then that's probably a good option too. Keys, I'll email you. I don't know, possibly, I hope so, but I'm not sure. If there's any other questions, I'll be on the comments in a second. So if you've got comments or questions, and if not, email me. So thank you for watching. Sorry this one was a bit longer, but hopefully that's useful, and I'll see you next time. Thank you. Bye.